today with Dr. Don Middleton. You actually grew up in Arizona and you attended medical school in Los Angeles. You've been a physician, a family physician for 25 years, but for the last 7 years or so, you've worked out at the Meadows in Wickenburg, which is an internationally acclaimed behavioral health center. So we're so happy to have you here, and we just really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us a little bit about this whole topic of substance use disorder, and in particular, the issue of addiction. So thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Kim. Glad to be here.
You know, one of the first questions almost consistently that people ask is, what is addiction? Why does it happen? They can't even understand, when their loved one or somebody gets involved in this, they're just like, I don't understand, I drank a little alcohol or something like that. That didn't happen to me.
Yeah.
So could you talk about that? Just, how do we best define addiction?
Yeah, the 80% of the people that aren't predisposed to it do use, and then they walk away from it and they're saying, well, why can't you? But in its simplest form, addiction is compulsively using a chemical or a behavior, usually to soothe yourself, and continuing to do it despite negative consequences. And it's those negative consequences that really define it, because someone might party very hard in college or whatever and then just say one day, I'm done. But it's the person that gets a DUI and drinks on their way home from the jail, or gets called to the carpet at work and continues the behavior until they get fired or divorced or incarcerated.
Yeah, so that issue of consequences is really the key to it.
Yeah, and the person feels compelled to do it despite those. That's one of the hallmarks of the definition of addiction.
Yeah, so I think your example of someone uses a substance, they get in trouble, maybe even legally, but then they're like, okay, I can't do that anymore, I'll stop.
Right.
But when somebody has this issue, what happens? I mean, they get arrested and then almost immediately, or what happens?
For thousands of years we've looked at it as a moral issue, as something that people can choose to do or they don't choose to do. And it's because we have the capacity to think things through and make decisions that we assume that everybody can about everything. And that's if it was up at the frontal cortex decision, that would be true. But that's not where drugs affect us. It's a different part of our brain, and it hijacks our decider and our ability to make clean decisions, and after a while it becomes the only pathway for us.
So why do you think people get started in the first place?
Well, using, obviously, or drinking. I mean, it's as old as since men crushed grapes. We've wanted to feel good, and so there's different reasons why people start. They want to feel good. They want to party or get high. They want to feel better, so they're kind of self-medicating, whether they're trying to treat depression or anxiety or social inhibition and that kind of thing. They want to do better, so there's like sports enhancement or academic enhancement, and they'll start Adderall so that they can study longer, and then they get to where they can't stop. And then there's just the trying to fit in crowd that's, whether it's a social group like a bowling league or softball league, or an ethnicity where their group drinks a lot and it's just expected being part of the gang or whatnot. So that's why people start. Why they can't stop is a whole different game.
It's a really good point, because we talked a little bit about how it starts, but like in my case, one of my sons, my older son, he was 15 years old, and a friend offered him a Percocet, just one pill.
Yeah.
And he took it, and I'll never forget, he told me later, he said, Dad, he goes, I was like, I need that again.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I've had to take that kind of medicine before, and I don't like how it makes me feel. As a matter of fact, I'll avoid it at all costs unless it's absolutely necessary. But in his case, he says, I cannot not have that.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that? The difference. Why is it like that with him?
Yeah, it's a complicated thing, and we're really starting to understand it a lot with modern medicine and imaging and studies, but several things have to break down for addiction to occur. The first is you have to have genetics that predispose you to that. And it's not all genetic. It's maybe about 40 or 50% genetics. But if a person never uses, they don't get addicted regardless of their genetics. So there's more to it than just that, right? Then there's repeated use on top of these unfavorable genetics. And over time, that causes some other neuro changes. Now, we talked before about the two parts of the brain are the frontal cortex, the decider part, and the midbrain, which is kind of like what we call lizard brain, or real basic part of our survival part of our brain. And in that, there's a thing called the pleasure center. And God put this in us so that we would continue to do things which help us biologically to continue our species, like food. Oh, that's good. I get a little bit of dopamine that says continue that. Or sex. That's good. I'll continue that. So, because it helps propagate the species. But the main thing is that when people with unfavorable genetics try those things, they don't just get dopamine. They get dopamine. And it really assigns too much value to those things. And certain things, like certain drugs, especially the stimulants like meth and cocaine, they cause huge dumps of dopamine on the system, and immediately the person assigns way too much value to it. Now, normally, with the normal genetics, the person's frontal cortex will say, hey, we need to stop doing that, and it's a top-down control. But in these people, the dopamine kind of hijacks it and turns off the frontal cortex and says, we're in control now. And the longer it happens, you build neural pathways around it so that even if it's not a convenient path, it's the only one you can choose anymore. And it causes inflammation in the brain and things like that, so that if you're not doing it, you feel very uncomfortable and you go through withdrawal. And in certain drugs, that can feel like you're about to die, and in some of them, it can actually kill you withdrawing. So you continue to use, not to party or have fun or do well in school anymore. You're continuing as a survival technique, and it's the only thing your body recognizes anymore is the survival.
So really, at that point, you could actually say people are not really using the drugs at that point to get high.
Oh, no.
They're just, after a while, they're just using it to keep from getting sick.
Yeah, a lot of people will tell you, like, my family goes, all you want to do is party, and they look at them and say, honey, the party's been over for a decade. I'm just trying to carry on and survive. And they don't understand that. And, good for them that they don't. That means they don't have it. But it's confusing even to the people within it. They'll say, why do you keep doing that? And they'll say, I don't know, I don't want to. But there they are again at the bar or the dealer, and they're using again.
Yeah, and that's really the question is why don't they stop? I mean, I remember dealing with this in my family, and I was just like, oh my gosh, his life is coming apart. He could die. I mean, all these things. And of course, I'd tell him these things, and he'd look at me and he'd be like, he knew that. Yeah. He knew the consequences. He knew what could happen. But then he'd just keep doing it.
We have these studies like back in like the 40s and 50s where they would take these little electrodes and put them in the pleasure center on mice. And they'd give it a little shock, and that mouse would hit that thing and hit it to the point that they wouldn't even eat or mate or anything. They just had to hit that pleasure center, and they became addicted. And they'd even put them on electrical grids that it would shock them, and they would keep hitting that thing until they died from electrocution. And it's weird to say, oh, well, great, mice can get addicted. Thanks for spending my tax money on that. But the point is that, look, the mice don't have this frontal cortex. It's not a moral decision. It's their midbrain hijacking their ability to do what's right for them.
So when you hear somebody say, drug use is a choice, so is it really a disease? Because I just choose not to do it.
Yeah. Well, a disease is when an organ functions abnormally. And so, like, if I have a femur and I break it, I've got a diseased femur, okay? If I have a pancreas that's not doing its job, I'll have diabetes. And our brains, in certain people, they get broken. And there's just no other way to say it. By repeated use and the dysfunctional genetics combined together, it breaks their ability to do normal things like decide to not. Yes, there is a choice to use in the first place, and that is on them, and everybody recognizes that. But after a while, the choice to use goes away, and what a person seems to be doing is trading a little bit of their free will for temporary relief. And as they do that more and more and more, after a while, their free will is completely depleted, and they don't have choices anymore.
So, with all that being said, is there hope? I mean, sounds like that happens and you're stuck. I mean,
Yeah, and there is hope. There is a lot of hope. But not everybody avails themselves of it. A lot of people either quit in prison or in a hospital or in the morgue. And that's unfortunate because there's ways we can help people, but we can't force them to do it. We can make them want to try, but we can't force somebody because it starts and ends with surrender, that I can't fix this on my own. And if you can get to that place before you die, you have a really good chance of recovering. But it's not a place that everybody gets to, unfortunately.
So even though it's something that's hijacked your brain, even though you have this predisposition maybe from genetics to do it, there's a way to break that.
Yeah, and it's different in different people. They like to call it rock bottom or whatnot, but it's a place where the pain of using actually gets to be more than the pain of stopping. And it's typically, I'm about to lose everything else that I hold dear in my life. Like the man might say, I don't care if I get fired, I can find another job. But if his wife says, I'm taking the kids and the house and you're losing your job, and then all of a sudden it's just too big of an ask, and it makes a little crack in his ego and he can see, oh my gosh, I got to do something different. And if that moment is coupled with a compassionate and empathetic group of people that can help him, then he's got a fighting chance. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking about this. It's really helpful just to understand the how and the why, because then maybe you can start to deal with what do I do about it.
Yeah, it's one of the most important subjects in our society right now.
Thank you again.
Yeah.
Appreciate you being here.
Oh, my pleasure.